Good afternoon and welcome to the Real Wealth Network's weekly webinar. I'm Kathy Fettke, CEO of Real Wealth Network, and very happy to have you here. On today's webinar, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of lease options. There are both. There's good things and things to be aware of. Please note that, as always, the strategies that we mention here in our presentations may not be appropriate for everyone, so always consult with your accountant, your tax advisor, and or attorney to discuss your specific situation. And of course, past performance is no guarantee of future results. Real estate purchases are subject to investment risks, including the possible loss of amounts invested. And while every effort is made to maintain accurate and current information, the possibility of errors and or updates always exists. So that, of course, is what our attorneys want us to say. And what I want to say is, please just always check in with us, because markets are changing, properties are changing, and we want you to check in with us at Real Wealth Network, because even just between you and me, I don't know if we have any affiliates listening, but you know, sometimes their markets change and they don't know it yet, but we do, or they might be moving into a new area of their market, and we just think it's always best practice to check in with your investment counselor at Real Wealth Network before making any purchase through any of our network affiliates. And also, always get your inspections and appraisals, because, you know, even with the greatest intentions, there might be things that get missed, and if you get that inspection from a third-party inspector, they may find things that will get fixed for you before you close on the property. Okay, or at least it can be negotiated with the seller. All right, so lease options. Hey, listen, lease options have been used by real estate investors for decades as creative ways to buy, sell, lease, or flip property. However, these contracts can become a legal and financial nightmare for either the buyer or the seller if they're not done right. And I'm about to tell you why. These are really important things, and we don't call our company Real Wealth Network for no reason. This is real. And this is real. It's just happened to me in a different kind of structure, not a lease option. But a lot of what I'm sharing with you today is from personal experience. And a lot of my personal experience I want to share with you so that you learn from the good stuff and avoid the bad stuff. All right, so let's see. Let's just start with what a lease option is, because sometimes there's confusion about that. It's just simply giving someone the option to purchase a property that they're leasing at the end of a specified rental period. All right, so the lease option gives the tenant the right to purchase the property at a later date for a set price, but there is no obligation, just the option. And it costs money in order to enforce this option according to the law. So you need to pay some kind of non-refundable option fee as the tenant, and that will enforce this contract. So it's usually about 3 to 5% of the purchase price, but I've done deals where it was just $1 simply to enforce that contract. So once you've got that option, what would be clarified in the option is the potential purchase price of the property that you want to buy. That needs to be specified. Or you may want to just base the purchase price on the future appraised value of that property at the time that the option is exercised, which is usually in 1 to 3 years. So obviously, as a tenant, you'd be better off negotiating a fairly low price in an area where there might be high appreciation. That's what we've done in some of our deals, because you may know that the area is appreciating, but the seller or landlord might not. So, trying to lock it in can be great. But if you don't know and you think maybe prices will remain flat or even decline, then, hey, why not just base it on the future appraised value? All right, so this is very different from a lease purchase. We did some lease purchase deals in Atlanta with our network, and there was some confusion, how it was different from a lease option. So basically, the difference is pretty simple. It's a bilateral or two-way agreement and is binding for both the seller and the buyer. So as I said earlier, the lease option is only binding for the seller, for the landlord. The buyer can just decide whether or not they want to enforce that option. But with a lease purchase, it's an agreement, it's a contract, and it's basically a done deal once you sign it. So some states treat these lease purchases as a transfer of ownership, even if the contract is not recorded and the tenant buyer is not yet on title. So this is really important for you to understand, because a lot of sellers don't understand this piece of it. And they might tell you that, hey, if your tenant doesn't pay, you can just evict them. But that may not be the case. You may have to do something else that's a lot harder, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, right here. So in the case of default, let's say you're the landlord and you've got a lease purchase with a tenant buyer, and that tenant buyer doesn't pay you, then you might have to foreclose rather than evict the tenant buyer, even if they're not on title. It just depends on the state. And so, unfortunately for you, and great for the tenant, during that process, the tenant buyer could actually live there for a long time without making payments if you're in a judicial state, because it takes forever to foreclose in a judicial state. That's why I'm constantly saying judicial states are a great place to buy, because they haven't really worked through their foreclosures for this reason. But it's not a great place to hold a note or to hold a lease option or lease purchase. Because again, if the tenant buyer has a good attorney, they could potentially argue that the contract wasn't even valid or was done incorrectly. So in these judicial states, you better make sure you've got a solid contract that's been approved by a very, very good attorney who understands these things. So you might say, well, I don't want to do a lease purchase then. I'll stick with lease option so that I don't have to foreclose. But this is the tricky part. It's imperative that you understand the local state laws before entering any purchase sale agreement, and have a knowledgeable attorney who specializes in real estate, and particularly these lease options. Make sure they're the ones drafting the contract, because some states treat lease options the same as lease purchases, and that, again, is a big surprise for investors who find out later, wow, I was just going to evict this person and now I have to foreclose and I can't, or it's taking me forever, or it's expensive. Okay, so this is so important, and again, not very many people know about it.